Let it go, make my body go. Make our bodies higher and higher.
If you're about to print a worksheet, and particularly if you've never printed the worksheet, it's best to get a print preview first. Now, if you're looking at the Excel menu system, the page layout tab seems to be the place to go for printing type features. We see a lot of them here, but we don't see a print preview. There is a keystroke shortcut. It's Control F2. That's going to be handy at times. Takes us to a print preview. You see a sheet to the right. Whenever you see a preview, look at the bottom of the screen. How many pages is this about to take up? 52 pages. I'm thinking of the data. It's about 700 rows or so. 52 pages seems like a lot. As you start to scroll, you'll eventually see that Excel looks like it's picking up data from a few columns to the left, then it goes to the middle. Maybe it even goes to the right. It might be picking up a lot more data than we want it to. Depends. Some data up top there. Yes. Looks a little bit strange. This is not acceptable. Press Escape to leave Print Preview. Another way to get to Print Preview can be by way of a Quick Access Toolbar button. Quick Access Toolbar, typically located above the ribbon menu system, although you possibly have moved it below, but its rightmost button gives us some popular options, including Print, Preview, and Print. I recommend this for every Excel user. Have it visible all the time. All we need to do for Print Preview is click this. So it's just about as fast as Control F2 or Escape. Remember, if you have neither the shortcut nor that button, the way to get to Print Preview is the File tab first, then the Print command. Takes a bit longer to get there. In any case, when you're here, Escape takes us right back. Now, the Page Layout tab has some options here. We want to use some of these. In the lower right-hand corner in the status bar, there are 3 buttons. The middle one is called Page Layout. We'll visit that in a bit. It is a little confusing to recognize that we've got 2 different areas here referred to as Page Layout. Now, it's possible that sometimes simply rotating the print using orientation, printing in landscape, and you see the images, it tells us clearly what we're about to do. If we choose landscape and go back to print preview, possibly this is going to look better. It's going to take up 49 pages now, not a whole lot different. And here too, scrolling up and down, we probably get some sense that maybe Excel really isn't deciding to print what we want to print. Yeah, it's gathering data from the right side as well. Let's say we don't want to do that. Escape. Let's highlight all the data we do want to print. Maybe it's not over to the right here. We just want to go through column J and then down to the bottom here. That's what we want to print right now. Then we can go to the Print Area button. This is under the Page Layout tab. Click this. Set Print Area. That's what we want to print and nothing else. Once again, back to our preview. Now it's 24 pages. So this might be more like what we're expecting. And maybe that's perfect. Now, at other times when you're printing, though, you could be thinking, that's going to be kind of crowded. It's awfully small print. You don't necessarily need to print every column. If we've got 2 different compensation columns, one's a new calculation, maybe we don't want to show one or either of them. So we can certainly hide a column. I'm going to right-click column H and hide it. If we go back to our print preview, it's going to look pretty much the same, but it might look a little bigger text-wise. So we could possibly make some other changes, but keep that in mind, that idea that sometimes, simply by hiding certain columns, you'll be able to print using less paper. We could reconsider our choice about landscape right here or back in Page Layout tab, but here's landscape orientation also. And one aspect of printing that's a little frustrating is a lot of features are available in multiple locations. And that may sound like a benefit, maybe sometimes it is, but at times you get a little confused because you're not always sure, where did I go last time to adjust this? And so we see some of these features appearing in different locations. I'm going to choose the drop arrow here for landscape and choose portrait. So instead of 24 pages, now we're back to 34. And so if we really want to use portrait layout, now we've got this issue to deal with. So once again, back into the worksheet. I think by now you might have the idea. When you're printing, it is a good idea to jump back and forth a little bit. In other words, you want this to print out in a certain way. And I'm perhaps exaggerating the number of times you have to go back and forth, but at least consider some of these options. Here's another feature as we go back to print preview. Here's page 1. I'll use the mouse wheel. Here's page 2, page 3. What's different in all of these? The title row that explains what's in each column, the field headings, only appear on page 1, but we do have an option to make them appear on all pages. Once again, escape, back here. Print titles on the page layout tab. Choose rows and or columns you'd like to repeat on each printed page. Click this. In this dialog box, rows to repeat at top. Click in the panel here, click and drag across the number of rows. It could be rows 1 and 2 in certain worksheets, 1, 2, and 3. And this one's simply row 1. We'll just click row 1. And from here, we can go right into print preview. And there's page 1, and I'll use the mouse wheel here. Page 2, page 3. We've got our titles on each sheet. Once again, escape. Now, sometimes we want to control the headings. The page layout button in the lower right-hand corner, the one that's between normal and the other button to the right called page break preview, which we haven't seen yet. Page layout right here displays the worksheet in a different way. This is what page 1 will look like. And if we keep scrolling down, we'll see page 2 and so on. Notice it shows the file name in the top, which we might or might not want. So we can make some adjustments. If we click in here, as I'm doing now, notice that up above we've got a design tab. Click it. It's not necessarily active at first. I don't want the file name here. I might want the sheet name. That could be more appropriate. Or I might just want to put in the company name, something like that. It's the ABC Rental Company or whatever. That's going to be on every page. Also, we might want to put in date and time. I'll put that on the right side, possibly. Left side, I might want to put in a page number. Now, notice you'll see page number or number of pages. We could possibly use both. If we put in page number, even though we see this oddity, print preview will give us an idea of what this looks like. We can simply, from here, press Control F2 or that button up above. The page number, actually you can see it before getting here, is simply a 1. You might want to put the word page next to that. So when we click back here, we can actually, before this, put in the word page, followed by a space. And if we click down the worksheet below, we can see it's going to look like this, page 1. In the right side, we might want to put in the date. Once again, you have to go back to the design tab up above, but I'm going to put in the current date, space, and maybe the current time also. And click right here. And at the time of this recording, there it is. So you've got control over this, and this is the fastest way to control the headings here, by way of that page layout button in the lower right-hand corner. And we can return to normal here simply by clicking the button in the lower right corner called normal. So we're back to a standard view. Now, we haven't explored all aspects of printing, but we showed you how the idea is you want to get a print preview. Remember, you can do it with this button that you've added to the quick access toolbar or by way of Control F2. And you want to go to the page layout tab and make some adjustments here, possibly to orientation, possibly by determining exactly what it is you want to print, and also by using print titles. Another approach to printing is to begin with what's called page break preview. And we're looking at a worksheet called page break preview sheet in this workbook called 06-printing. In the lower right-hand corner in the status bar, there are 3 buttons, and normally the normal button is active. Next button over, page layout. You may have seen something about this in a prior movie. And to the right, page break preview. Usually this zooms back and we see a solid blue line, typically on the top on the left and sometimes way off to the right, but here it's visible. And also, maybe, but not always, some dash lines. If we did nothing special and simply printed right away, we see the watermark type displays here. This is going to be on page 1, below that page 2. What are we seeing off to the right? This is going to be on page 18, page 19. Almost nobody would want to print out the worksheet in this style. Now, in an earlier movie you might have seen, will it make sense to hide some columns and force this to be on one page? Possibly. Before printing though, you should adjust column widths. I'm going to either drag across here, but since there's no data, click in the upper left corner, select the entire worksheet, double click a boundary between column letters. When you're doing this prior to printing, it's a good idea to zoom back to 100%. If it's not already 100%, look in the lower right-hand corner, you'll see the percent. You can click the plus or minus at either end, or drag the slider here to make sure it's 100%. As you drag across these, or you've clicked in the upper left corner, either way, double-click a column boundary. Now, column C actually needed to be wider, and you saw what happened here. Let me press Control Z here. The breakpoint was between column H and I. I'll press Control Y. Now it's between F and G. Now it looks as if we don't really need to print columns K and J, and if we didn't, we could drag that blue border inward to the left. Now, if we jump over to Print Preview by way of the Print Preview button, now you might have added this to the Quick Access toolbar, but if you haven't, you can certainly press Control F2. And this is what we would have expected based on what we saw earlier. It's going to take more pages than we want. If we scroll down a bit here, roughly halfway, we'll see how the display jumps to the right side. So we're not quite there yet. So one option is, what if we were to move the border here leftward? Now that's going to chop off our columns. We don't want to do that. But what if we move the page break rightward? How's this going to work? Now as we scroll up and down, that says page 1. Have we solved our problems? Well, maybe, but is this going to be too crowded? So what can we do here? Let's go to Print Preview, that button in the Quick Access toolbar if you've added it. It looks pretty crowded to me. Maybe I'll print a single page. Now, bottom of the screen says 1 of 12. It's going to be on 12 pages. Maybe that's what we've been headed for here. But by printing a single page, and you can, if you're ready to print here, notice Print Active Sheets. We could click the drop arrow here, Print Selection, something like that. We see what's happening there, only that. So let's escape from here. If we highlighted just the first page, we could get to it this way. There are other ways to do this too, by the way. But if we highlighted just that, and then jumped into Print Preview, Control F2, Print Selection, print this, we could just print the data that's highlighted right now. Another option could have been just to print page 1 of 1. Now, features you might have seen in the previous movie could apply here as well too. For example, if we wanted to adjust the titles so that we always see the titles on every page, escape here, we could make that adjustment too up here under Print Titles. I won't repeat that action right now. Now, there could be times when you say, well, this is looking pretty good, we think. You just won't know until you print a page. But do consider the option of hiding a column, or if we really don't want to show new comp on the right, let's just bring in the border this way. Now, you can work with your data when it's in this view. It's a little bit unorthodox to do that, but even though this has a particular look to it, if we had other data to the right, it would be against that solid gray background, the way we see this. But this could be sufficient to get you started on the way to printing this. So, before printing again, let's say that we've got our data here. We want to go to Print Preview, Control F2. If your screen looks like this, possibly it's because of the print settings here. I'll simply change this to be Active Sheets. There we go, and we'll see all of our data. Another option to consider is some of the sizing here. And you can get to this in different ways. There are custom margins here. We can make some changes there. And you can see how adding more white space above and below could be helpful. So here's some other options here too. But the main purpose of this particular movie is to make you aware of that button in the status bar called Page Break Preview. It allows us to control what's about to be printed. And you can imagine other scenarios here where maybe we sorted this in a different way and didn't need data at the bottom. Now in this case that's not the scenario, but you can also bring up the border this way. Or if you had a rationale that says, I don't need to print the actual names here. I want this to be an impersonal sort of printout. We don't want to include column A. We could drag in the left border this way. So if we were to print this now, we would have information about all the people, but we wouldn't have the people's names in the area that's about to be printed. Once again, Print Preview. So Page Break Preview is how we get to this feature that allows us to control where page breaks are and where page borders are. When you're about to print a worksheet, Page Layout is the obvious of our menu tabs to go to first to control some of the features. You might have seen this in an earlier movie. If you were to consider adding print titles, notice that the dialog box that pops up is called Page Setup. And if you have worked with Excel in prior versions, you recognize this dialog box with its different tabs here as well. And you might also have noticed that the Page Layout tab here has a section called Page Setup. And there's an arrow in the lower right-hand corner, a dialog box launcher, which activates Page Setup. So one approach to printing is to begin here. Now, it doesn't comprise everything that we need, but it certainly gives us some exposure to the ideas of printing. And many of the features found here are found elsewhere, but particularly if you are familiar with older versions of Excel, this can be helpful. From here, you could jump right into Print Preview, always look at the bottom of the page. This says page 1 of 34. Scroll through this with the mouse, and you'll see what's happening. It looks as if Excel is picking up the left side of the worksheet, then it's moving over to the right and picking up other fields. Notice also when you're seeing the print preview, over in the left here, page setup. Click there, and what do we see? That same dialog box. So we can get to this in different ways. If we escape from here, we're back in the worksheet environment. If you need to get to print preview at any time, and thereby get to print setup that way, you can certainly press Control F2. Or if you've added the print preview button to the quick access toolbar, you can certainly click there too, get to your print preview. So what other things might we want to use on page setup? After going to the preview, let's say here it is again, and recognizing that there's a lot of white space on the edges there, maybe we could control the margins. Now here too, like a lot of printing features, we see these in multiple locations. Here's an option for controlling margins right here. You might give that a shot, or possibly go to page setup. And here's a section called margins. Now right now we're seeing there's an inch on top, inch on bottom. That might be just fine. If you're not going to put much in the header or footer, maybe you can lower that. Click the drop arrow here. 3/4 of an inch, 3/4 of an inch. That's going to allow us to see more rows per sheet. If we're right near that break point where maybe we can see all of our data on a few sheets less, why not? So I'll click OK here. Let's watch that number at the bottom of the screen. 1 of 34. Now it's 1 of 32. Not a big change, but it does point out the idea. When you go to the page setup option at the bottom here, to activate page setup, when you make changes here, and then click OK, you'll see a change possibly not only in the display, but also in the number of pages. By changing the margins on the left or right side, that's not going to control the number of pages here, but it might pull in an additional column. Now, again, I might be nitpicking on this one. Maybe I'll make the left and right margins both smaller. This may or may not have an effect. As I click OK, keep an eye on the preview to the right. The compensation column right now is the rightmost column. I'll click OK. It didn't add an additional column, but you saw how the data squeezed onto the page, allowing us to have more room on the right. So that thought is at work also here. We've got other choices here. Could we fit this to, how about 1 page wide by, now a guess here, if we squeeze this so that we pull in other columns from the right, maybe we can fit this into, how about 16 pages? That's half of what we're seeing right now. Is this going to work? Well, let's see what the preview looks like. Click OK. Looks like we could do this. Now we've got another problem, which could be fixed with another feature, but now we're seeing how Excel is picking up data that we really don't want. So let's escape here. And I'll use a feature from a prior movie here, Page Break Preview. Lower right-hand corner, this button right here, and I'll move this thick blue line leftward to here. And let's go back to our print preview now. Now it's 14 pages. Now, that could be our solution, that could be it. Features from prior movies we might need to explore a little bit again here. Escape. We could go back here, zooming in a little bit so we can see this better. Lower right-hand corner, use the slider bar possibly, or the plus button on the right. If we wanted to see titles on every page, we could do that simply from print titles. What does this do? It activates page setup. There it is again. Rows to repeat at top. Click in here, click row 1 in the example here, and here's our print preview. So this could be it. We might be ready to print. We can print from right here. There's the button. Now again, if there are other things we'd like to change here, page setup, we've got some control over this too. We can also control header footer from here. Right now, you can probably see it faintly in the background. It's ready to print the file name. I don't think I'd want that there. Header footer, you see it's going to print 06-printing. That's the file name. Now, there's a drop arrow here. Here are variations on this. My name is in here, the date is in here. I don't like any of these maybe. So how about a custom header? Now, in a prior movie, you might have seen how you might do this with page layout. I might put in the company name here. It's the ABC Rental Company. Good enough there. If you want to add dates and other features, those are available right here. For example, this button right here, which looks like a calendar, we can actually insert the date. Now, sometimes when you look at these, you don't see the pop-up tip below it, but look Back there it is insert date, space, insert time. We could do that as well too. And if we simply click OK, and then OK again, although we can't see it real clearly here, but we can begin to see what's happening with the date and time here. We could also put a page number in there as well. This time moving off to the left, page setup. Get to it this way, going back to header footer. If you want a page here, back to custom heading, you might want to put it on the right side, and we've got some options in here for putting in the page number. Over here is the button insert page number. That'll simply be the page number. We could put in front of that PAGE space, so we'll see page space and then the page number. And then after that, if we wanted to, we could put in the word of, OF, space, and then there's a button up here for total pages, right here. And once again, clicking OK, so we see page 1 of, depending on how many pages we're going to be printing here, back to custom header. Eventually that will show all pages. Click OK, click OK. That says page 1 of 14. You can barely see that. I can see it, page 1 of 14. We see that in the preview. And there's another set of options you might want to explore under page setup, and that's on the sheet tab. If for documentation purposes, a different worksheet probably would be a better example here, but you might want to show row and column headings, possibly the grid lines. Now, I'm going to take off the grid lines for the moment. This feature isn't always automatic, and sometimes people misuse this because they see grid lines as they're working with the data. They don't see them in the worksheet. They don't know about this option, and they actually put in border lines later. So let's take a look at the preview now by clicking OK. No grid lines. Now that could be acceptable for some data. I think in the list you probably would want to see them. Do you really want to see column headings and row numbers? Well, we are here. And I think in this kind of a worksheet you probably would not want to see those. But in a spreadsheet that's dealing with financial data, sometimes that's going to be valuable. Once again, back to page setup and some other options here. We can change portrait and landscape here just as we could in at least 2 other places. We can squeeze the data onto one page. If we had only 25 or 60 rows of data, something like that, we might want to simply fit this to 1 by 1 page. Or we could sometimes actually adjust the percent view here. Right now the data has been shrunk 85% so that it fits across a page evenly. So we can adjust that sometimes. So I think you get the idea here. There's so many different approaches to printing. This is just one, using the page setup dialog box here. We saw in previous movies other approaches to this as well. Lots of choices here, lots of capability. It's always best to get a preview and work out your printing thoughts ahead of time. And I'm also suggesting, by the way, that when you've done this with a given worksheet, next time you print this, you do almost very little additional work. In fact, it's pretty much just select the data and print. So you don't have to repeat this every time you print. So we've seen some options here in the example here, using page setup, either from the button right here, or from some other ways we saw it by way of print preview, getting into this page setup dialog box with lots of options. We're looking at a worksheet called Creating Charts in the file 07-charting. We can see the numbers, we know what's happening, and yet a picture can really help. Some of us don't absorb the numbers as easily as others. Let's imagine we'd like to display a chart to accompany this data. Now in Excel, officially and formally, we use the word chart, not graph. If you say graph, I have a good idea you mean chart, but chart is the term we look for and we use in the Excel menu system. If you want a chart quickly, the data is highlighted, press Alt F1. You'll get a chart immediately, right on the same worksheet. That might or might not be the best chart. Notice also, the menu system has changed. We've got a new ribbon called Chart Tools. There's a Design tab. There's a Format tab. The Design tab is more important for the most part. Format tab is a lot about the visuals. It's a lot simpler. It's been redesigned from prior versions, starting in Excel 2013. So, still, one of the problems you will encounter as you work with charts sometimes is you've just got way too many choices. So, we've created a chart here with one method, Alt F1. Alt F1 always shows what's called a clustered column chart. The most common chart type for most Excel users tends to be a chart of this type. Now, I'm going to delete this chart simply by pressing Delete. How about a chart with this data? I didn't say it earlier, but do, when you're selecting data for a chart, highlight the row that's typically above it, also the column that's usually on the left side. For descriptors, labels, these will appear in charts as they did in the prior example. As a general rule, but certainly not an ironclad rule, do not mix totals and details together. Now we could do this, and I'll show you a bit later what that looks like, but imagine some of these totals appearing here. Ultimately, we've got a total here that's almost 8,000, and yet we've got some numbers here that are not even 200, so we're going to have extremely high columns and very small ones at the same time. So keep those out of there most of the time. These are highlighted. We can create a chart, certainly in some other ways as well. The more standard way is to go to the Insert tab, and we've got a section over here, a group called Charts on the Insert tab. And off to the left, Recommended Charts. Let's try that. This is another approach to charting. And we see some options, and often we'll see a scroll bar. How does that look? That's called a clustered bar chart. Now, I'm not suggesting in any way you memorize these, but you'll start to get familiar, certainly with a few types here. Clustered bar and clustered column are very common, as is the stacked version. Here's a stacked bar. Down here's a clustered column. Now, as you're looking at these, you're not always sure which type looks best, so scroll up and down a bit, explore these, take a look. You'll decide on one of them. Maybe this one is the one you like. Click OK. That's certainly an approach to printing. And once again, we see those two tabs, Design tab and Format tab. Click outside of the chart, they disappear. It's easy to create a chart. And there's another way too. Same data, I've got it highlighted here. As soon as I highlight these, a little box appears in the lower right corner. It's called the Quick Analysis button. Click it, and here we see charts along with some other features. Click Charts, and we see some previews here as we slide across these. So this is pretty fast as well. There's the one I chose already, but I might want to create another one looking like this. And if that were not enough, there's another way to create a chart, a keystroke shortcut for putting a chart on a separate sheet. I've got my data highlighted. Now maybe this time I don't want to show all the data. Maybe I don't want to show southeast, but I do want to show southwest. When your data is not contiguous, you can highlight the data in chunks using the control key, as I'm doing here, highlighting the data. I don't want to show southeast, but I do want to show southwest. When you're highlighting non-contiguous cells here, you use the control key. When you're highlighting the first group, you don't need that, but you let go of the left mouse button, then hold down control, highlight the other range or ranges. Envision these pieces as coming together as a rectangle. If we want a chart on a separate sheet, we'll press F11. Totally new sheet to the left of the sheet that's got the data. Now, is it any better to have a chart on a separate sheet? If you want to focus just on the chart and fine-tuning it to make it look just the way you want it to, and you want to print it all by itself, that's fine. You can use this feature. I think it's more common to see a chart next to the data, but you can go either way. If you change your mind and say, I want to move this, click near that upper perimeter of the chart, up top, right-click, Move Chart. We can move it to either the same worksheet that we saw the data or a different worksheet if we wanted to. And when we have charts on a worksheet like we do here, we can right-click the chart here, do it in the upper section near the top border, usually the best place. And here too, we can move a chart. So no matter where you put the chart, you can move it later if you wanted to. But we've seen how to create a chart pretty easy. Another way too, slightly more methodical, where you know ahead of time which chart type you want. There's not much doubt. You've got your data highlighted. Maybe it's this. You go to the Insert tab and you say, I want a bar chart. There's some column and bar charts together here. Click this, all set. All these ways, I think you can see, are pretty fast. And I think you can also see too that although the charts are not complete, they have most of the elements that we would need. They have a legend that works. The labeling appears either below or to the left of the clusters. We see numbers on the screen. The title isn't what we would want, and the numbers aren't explained, but in other respects, the charts are almost there, so it certainly doesn't take long to get started. If you start exploring on the Format tab, you'll eventually see lots of choices here for making this look better in terms of color, but stick to the Design tab for a while to get the essentials of charting down. This is where we'll be spending time in the next movie, talking about different buttons here, like switch row, column, and changing the chart type. But when you make your initial selection, it can be very fast. Highlight the data, either press Alt F1, F11, or go to the Insert tab and create a chart using some of these choices here. It's not always clear which chart type is going to work best for your data, but because it's so easy to change chart types, it's a great feature to be working with. We're on a worksheet called Chart Types in a workbook called 07-Charting. Let's imagine we want to create a chart with the data to the left here. We'll highlight the data, and if we're in a hurry, we'll simply press Alt F1. When you create a chart by way of Alt F1, or if you press F11 to get a chart on a new sheet, you get what's called the default chart type in Excel. It's called clustered column, and often it can be the best chart. It shows the data pretty clearly what's going on here, no difficulty in reading it. It makes sense. It might not be the best, but looks pretty good. But we've got this button here available. Remember, when a chart is selected, we've got two contextual tabs in the ribbon, a Design tab, a Format tab. The Design tab is the more important one. Format is mostly about the visuals. Design tab, change chart type. There's another kind of chart here as we slide across. Stacked column. Maybe that's better. 100%, specialized uses. We've got some 3D versions out here. They might be more colorful. They're not necessarily better to read. Even this one maybe. How's that going to look? Try that. Not your best chart, probably. It certainly is an attention getter, but not always the easiest to read. Let's change this back again. Control Z would be faster here. Back to here. But let's reconsider this again. Change chart type. How about a bar? Any better? We see a preview there. Well, it could be. That's a clustered bar. How about a stacked bar? Maybe that's better. Click OK. And I think at different times you'll just have different thoughts about which of these does look better. Bar charts, commonly seen, as are column charts, which you saw earlier. Would this be better as a line chart? Probably not, but let's take a look at it. Chart type. Line. There we go. Not so good here. Line charts tend to work best if you're comparing data that involves a time period. This looks like the data is flowing from item to item. That probably doesn't make sense here. Not a good choice. Let's delete the entire chart. The data to the right does have a time frame. We might want to show all of it, so highlight the data here. It's generally best not to show totals along with this, so leave those off. This is highlighted. Once again, I'll press Alt F1. There's a chart. Now, we can certainly see things are changing from month to month. It looks like it's getting a little better over time, but that might be a lot more obvious in a line chart. Change chart type. If you are using line, I do recommend the fourth option. It tends to work best, but even the previews down here are giving us some sense of what this is going to look like. And clicking one of them, we get a better preview. There it is. Looks pretty good. Now that's ideal because it does show what's happening month by month, and data does flow month to month, you might say, like that. So that's, I think, a better chart than a column chart might be, which tends to be a bit more crowded. When you're looking at charts too, you also have the option of changing not only the look of them, but the orientation. Now, I recommend this button highly, but on certain line charts, it's pretty obvious this is not a great choice. But what does this mean, actually? Switch row column. The description doesn't really do it justice. It says, swap the data over the axis. What does that mean? Try it. Not a great choice here. It's pretty obvious on many line charts that one of these choices is likely to be better. But what if this were a column chart? I'm going to switch it back to a column chart. Clustered column. Looking like that. Notice how each cluster of columns is about a month. This time when we switch row column, each cluster is about a region. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that's a better chart or even that it's a good chart, but I think it's certainly viable. But it reveals the data in a different way. And sometimes you might be saying, well, I like this. Let's press Control Z. I also like that. Which one is better? Maybe we could have both. You can easily duplicate a chart. Simply press Control D. So if a chart's selected, press Control D. You immediately have a copy of it. There it is. For the moment, they're looking the same. But switch row column on one of them and not the other. And then we've got both. So again, not saying that always it's good to have two versions of the same data, but sometimes it makes good sense. And You can make a case for saying that's true here. Maybe the chart to the left might be better stacked, maybe not, but consider these options. You want to have that sense of freedom and exploration that says, I'm not sure what I want sometimes, but let's explore some of these options. Column charts, probably the most common. Line charts are very common. Also bar charts. Another chart type, as I delete these two, is a pie chart. It's more specialized, but it certainly has its uses. Pie charts can deal with only a limited amount of data. If, for example, I'm highlighting this data right here off to the left, this time I'll go to the Insert tab. Could go to Recommended Charts, but maybe I'll go right to the pie immediately, right here. Maybe a 3D pie. There's the preview, and there it is. Now, you'll notice that I had highlighted all the data, and yet this says NE. It's only showing Northeast data. A pie chart can only show data from one row or column, not multiple rows or columns. And there's another oddity about a pie chart. Now, it does have its merits, particularly for yearly budgets. I see that as its most frequent use, perhaps, or maybe these would represent pieces of the pie for the year. But here's the oddity. If some of the data is negative, and if I interject here, have you ever heard of a negative piece of pie? That doesn't sound right, does it? I'm going to make this 570 up here be a negative number. Minus 570. What happens on the chart? Nothing at all. The only thing that would be different is if we had labels on it, which we could add, we'd see that this piece over here, this red piece, it says value minus 570. But it doesn't make any sense when you think about it. The pieces of a pie add up to the whole, but if there's a negative piece of pie, well, that just doesn't make any sense at all. And yet Excel seems to say, well, I'll just ignore it and treat it as a positive. So be alert to that idea. Now, I'm not negating the use of pie charts, but I am suggesting if there's negative data, just don't use a pie chart. It has its uses. 3D pie charts, by the way, also have this feature that might look a little distortive. Those numbers are fairly close to one another, but even here you might be assessing, how about this pie back here? That's 662. The green piece in front is 413. Now, I think the blue piece does look bigger, but on the other hand, is that green piece almost the same? Well, again, make your judgment on that. Maybe a 2D pie chart would be better. Once again, when the chart is selected, we can go back to the Design tab and make our change. So you don't want to be timid about using this. You're just not always sure. And changing a chart type is easy, and you get good previews out here as well with these different types that we see it. You want to see it bigger? Click there. Back up, explore some others. How about this one? Is that a good one? No, probably not. And so on. Easy to make changes. And don't overlook that idea, not so much with the pie chart, but with the other charts, about changing the orientation, once again. And this idea, too, as we select data, I only want to do the first half. Well, of course, I only need to highlight this data. If I wanted to do just the second half, I'd highlight this data here, let go of the left mouse button, use the Control key, and highlight this data. Alt F1 gets us started. There's the data that way. Consider changing switch row column. Looks pretty good that way, too. Always consider this option, even though sometimes it's pretty obvious one's going to be better than the other. So we've seen some ways in this movie to not only consider the different chart types that might be available, but also how to make changes to them. Now, the stuff of a different, more detailed course could involve other chart types, so without going into those, but at least pointing them out to you. When your data is highlighted and you're about to create a chart, go to the Insert tab. And if you choose Recommended Charts, you'll see, as we see here, not only these choices, but all charts. We've seen this before. And start making yourself aware maybe of area charts. I think you'll see sometimes they work, and they're certainly not going to work so well in this case, although maybe there's viability in some of this. XY scatter charts. If you're comparing two sets of values, sometimes that's going to work. Stock charts, high, low, close, open data. If you've got the data for that, that's a possibility. Surface charts, highly specialized. I rarely see them myself, although in certain environments I'm sure they're used. Same thing with radar charts. Some new charts in Excel 2016. A tree map chart, sunburst chart. Histograms, you've probably seen these at different times, including a variation there called a Pareto chart. Box and whisker, some other types here. Waterfall charts. And you can combine charts this way too. You can combine line and column charts as we see here. Line and bar charts too sometimes. So there are some other chart types. but we've seen the major ones. Again, column, bar, line, and pie. Changing chart types is something you'll do often as you work with charts in Excel. When you create a chart in Excel, many of the chart elements are all in place and practically ready for presentation. As I highlight the data here in this worksheet called Formatting Charts, I can create a chart quickly with Alt F1, or if I want a chart on a separate sheet, the F11 key, or going by way of the Insert tab in the ribbon, I can go to Recommended Charts, possibly pick one of the other buttons in the background, focus on the chart type I want, possibly this one. I like that best. Click OK. Got a chart. We've got a legend either on the right side or below it. It explains what the colors stand for. Beneath each cluster of columns, we see a region name. That works fine. Chart title is not something we want to keep. We might want to explain the numbers down the left-hand side. So what's missing here? You could make the case for saying just two things. A main title on top, title down the left-hand side. One approach is click chart title, type in whatever we want. That's easy to do. You can also pick up data from the worksheet, if appropriate. I'm going to drag the chart from the upper right corner, downward a bit. I want the chart title to pick up data from cell D1, so I'll click chart title. And all I need to do here is to type equal, click cell D1, and enter. There's the title. If I want to do a little bit of formatting, I could jump over to the Home tab. I could be bold, maybe italics in some cases, sometimes not. I can change the background, but let's just focus on the idea. We quickly created the title simply by typing equal, clicking on a cell that has the data we want for the title, and there it is. Now, title down the left-hand side could be more problematic. You might want a title on the bottom too, although the legend is down there. So what else can we do here? On the Design tab in the ribbon, there's a choice, almost buried. It's real tiny. As we slide over Quick Layout, it says change the overall layout of the chart. Now, visually, that doesn't give us much attention, whereas this section right here does. I'm going to come back to Chart Styles, but let's first look at Quick Layout. Change the overall layout. That gives us different choices. If it's a stacked column chart, we see 9 choices. As I'm sliding over these, keep an eye on the chart. Now you can begin to see what's happening. On some of these, we see the legend to the right. On some of these, we see no grid lines, but we see numbers. Other times, legend on the bottom. We're seeing different layouts. Over time, you'll probably have a favorite or so. I tend to prefer layout 9. Let's try this one. Now, everything is still not in place. I might want to make this wider, but off to the left, I see the phrase Axis Title. Now, I don't necessarily have a worksheet entry that I want to pick up this time, so I won't be typing equal. I just want this to say sales in millions. So I'll click here and type in sales in millions. Now, if I mean millions of dollars, I might say dollars or just $sign. As I'm typing this, you see it in the formula bar. You don't see it on the chart. As I press enter, you will see it. There it is. Title below, maybe I don't need that. I'll just press delete. Or if I do need it, I'll type. So, for some people, that's it. That's all you need. We're finished. We don't need to do anything else. But on the other hand, there are chart styles. Take a look at this. Here's a drop arrow. As we slide over these, take a look at that chart. Some of these are real attention getters. Some not so good. Once again, you're judging. If you're an indecisive person, well, good luck. Lots of choices here. Sometimes black charts show up better on a projection screen, sometimes not. I'd advise against them on printing. You use up a lot of ink, and they don't always display that well on paper, maybe. Looks pretty good here, though, I think you could say. Lots of choices. Maybe we'll go with this one. This is not changing content, but it is changing, as you can see, the visuals. And again, someone else could make the judgment. That's all we need. We're done. We don't need to do anything else. So it's easy to do. On the other hand, let's come back here again. Change the style. I'll use a more white background, let's say, one of these. Let's say you like this one. As you move the mouse around a chart, for example, right here, you notice the phrase plot area. Up here, chart area. You don't need to memorize those terms, but you start to become familiar with them. What's this right here? Well, it's a chart title. Off to the left, we see some information. Vertical value axis title. At different times, you do want to be aware of these. Now, if you want to make a change, say to the inner portion of this, it's called plot area. Let's just click in here. We've selected the plot area. We might want to go to the Format tab in the ribbon. Some choices over here for shape styles. As I slide over these, you can see in the background what's about to happen. And I think you can see some of these choices maybe are not so great. Others might be appealing to you. I wouldn't say that's a great choice, but not so bad. I'll choose that. I want the outer area maybe to be a different color. There too we can go to shape styles. Dark red maybe? That sure stands out. How about these? Once again, lots of choices here. This is the danger of charting where you get bogged down on some of these choices. I'll just click that one. I'm not sure if I like that one, but I'll use it for a while. Actually, it's the inner part that I'm not too wild about. I might go back to Design tab. I think you get the idea here. We could be spending a lot of time on this. It's just a question of what's looking best. If we go back to Chart Styles and make a different choice here, remember there's a drop arrow, we can begin to see different options here. Now that wipes out some of the formatting choices we might have made earlier. So once again, reconsider, come back here, make some of these choices if you wish. Different ideas here, but relatively easy to get to. We've got word art styles, tons of other choices on the Format tab. But some of us are pickier than others about this. Some of us have pickier managers, you might say, who demand that this look a little more appealing. The text down the left-hand side, kind of white, can't see it so well. What might we do there? You can actually click that area. Maybe go to the Home tab. Make that be bold. Does that help? Not so much, maybe. But maybe black font? That could be better. Same thing with this. So these are easy changes as well, too. It's just that there's so many of them. Even the legend down here, that might look better with black font, at least on the background that we've chosen here. So you can begin to see how different people will approach this differently. The main idea, of course, is the chart showing the data the way we want? So once again, reconsidering, when you create a chart, sometimes all you need to do is adjust the titles, nothing more than that, and you're all set. At other times, you might want to add some additional formatting features. Again, Format tab in the ribbon, the contextual tab that appears when a chart is selected. The various components of a chart are referred to as chart elements. We're looking at a worksheet called Chart Elements in the 07 Charting Workbook. As you select a chart, the outer area near the borders is referred to as a chart area. That's a chart element. The inner area is called a plot area. And as you click these, and the chart is selected, the Format tab in the ribbon in the extreme upper left corner does tell us what's currently selected. Now, I'm not suggesting you memorize these, but as you point to different items or elements here, here's a grid line, we can click that. We also see this in the upper left corner. There's a drop arrow here also, and we can see some of the other elements before actually selecting them. So, sometimes we want to make changes to these. And in older versions of Excel, these were based in the menu system at the top of the screen. And the choices seem to be overwhelming and hard to get to. But starting in Excel 2013, there's been a redesign of how charting formatting works. So, in this particular chart that we're looking at here, you'll notice, as with any chart, when it's selected, some buttons to the right. There's a paintbrush right here. If you click this, you'll see some different styles. Now, this is exactly what you might see if, with the chart being selected, you go back to the Design tab in the ribbon and you see these chart styles up above. So you see these choices here? These are the same ones we see if the chart is selected and we click the paintbrush to the right. But the plus button to the right, as I click it, reveals, with the heading Chart Elements, some of these different features. Here are axes here. Now, we've got axes in place down the left-hand side, across the bottom. There's an arrow to the right here. We can click this, and we can see that these are both in place. Take off one of these, take off primary horizontal, watch the chart. We're not seeing the headings. We would certainly want that, so these you're likely to see. Axis titles. We don't have them just yet. We just, for the moment, are seeing placeholders for them. Look on the chart where you see axis title below the chart and also to the left-hand side. If we want to add these, we can click the arrow to the right there and add these. And then, of course, we'll have to put in the appropriate text if we truly want these. So let's say we do. We'll get to them a bit later. Chart titles already in place. Data labels, you might not have seen those. That's what they look like. We can click the arrow to the right. We see some other choices. How might they look? Center, inside end, inside base, and so on. we see some choices here. One of those, data callout, would be pretty busy looking. Or more options here, and this could take us into a dialog box on the right side of the screen. If we don't want to look at this right now, we can simply click the X. Come back to the plus, maybe back to data labels, and uncheck that for the moment. Reconsider that later. You might not know what a data table is, but we get a preview of how that might look. And as we slide over these, we might consider adding them. We can check the box or not. I'm going to go back to data labels and uncheck that. Not wild about the look of that. Grid lines are already in place, but there are others. We can see some options. So it takes a while to explore all these, and I'm certainly not suggesting that it's necessary to change them all, but from time to time you might want to change this one or that one. So we've got some choices here. Legend is already here. There's an arrow to the right. We could consider putting the legend on the right side, right there, instead. Click outside of this. Looks like there's not enough room in this case. It looks like it's not accepting it. But top, it does. Left, bottom, more options. So we can go out here and get to this. So different approaches here to working with these. And there's another approach, too, to working with elements. Sometimes all you need to do is to double-click. I'm looking at this chart and saying to myself, I like it when there's more white space above the columns. So what do I want to double-click on to make a change? Any of the numbers down the left-hand side, these are the axis numbers. I want to double-click one of them. It automatically activates a dialog box to the right. Now, these dialog boxes are quite extensive, and you'll see different choices up top here. This one says Axis Options, Size and Properties, Effects, Fill and Line. A lot of choices. All I want to do is to change the maximum here, which is automatic. It adjusts with the data, but I want to change it to 1,000. So this is just one example of a change you might want to consider making. Type in 1,000, either click somewhere else or press enter. Either way, you see what's happening in the chart. You can move this dialog box by dragging its title bar. No real reason to do this, but sometimes you might want to do that. Or if it's already floating out here, if you want it to return to the right side, double-click its heading. It goes off to the right. So we get here by way of double-clicking one of the elements if we want to make a change that way. I think generally it's better, after getting rid of this, to consider, at least first, clicking the plus, exploring the options this way. But again, the fallback method, double-click the element in question. I want to change the grid lines. I'm not sure what I want to do with them, but I'll double-click. Now, how do you position the mouse on the grid line? Sometimes it's a little tricky. Can't quite do it, maybe. We can go to the Format tab. Off to the left, we see this white panel that shows the different elements. Drop arrow here. I see Value, Axis, Major Grid Lines. That's what I want to change. Click that. And then below it, Format Selection. So maybe I'll go down this path here and consider making those lines maybe not gray, but black. Or maybe red, or blue, or whatever. I'm not sure if that looks better, but maybe change the width of it even. I think you can see here how you can, if you're not careful, spend way too much time out here. I'll close this down. But lots of approaches. Remember, the fallback method is to double-click, or perhaps more coherently, click the plus that appears to the right of the chart and explore the particular element that you want to make changes to. And lots of options out here. Sometimes you want a visual to accompany data, but you either don't have room for a chart or don't want to go to the trouble of creating a chart and worrying about all the elements of it and how you want it to look and so on. You want a quick picture of the data in question. I'm going to select this data right here. This is on a worksheet called Spark Lines in the file 07-charting. When you select data like this, the Quick Analysis button appears. Let's click it and choose Spark Lines. Now, spark lines, not exactly a misnomer, but spark lines can be lines or columns or win-loss. And as I slide over these, look in the background, you see what's about to happen. Line is probably the most commonly used. I'll select it right now. That gives us a picture of what's been happening. It's a line chart of this data. And here's a line chart for the next row and so on. We see that. We can make changes to this to make it stand out even more strongly, if we wish. As we select this data, the contextual tab appears in the ribbon. It's a design tab with some features associated with spark lines. Lots of choices here for colors. Maybe that looks better, maybe not. We can change not only the sparkline color, but also the weight of it, meaning the thickness. Maybe it'll look better if it's a bit thicker. We also have control over showing all of the markers. We can do that, or possibly just the high point. In this case, it's at the end. In each case, the low point, not always at the beginning, but there it is there. We see some options here for controlling the display of this. Off to the left, and we saw this earlier, this could look better as a column, could look better as a win-loss. One of the downsides of column, by the way, is as you look at the different heights here, don't be comparing different rows. In other words, you might be comparing them for trend purposes, but don't assume the height of the column is proportional. If I'm looking at all these columns at once here, I'm thinking that maybe the last column in all cases is the tallest, and it probably is for each set of data, but the last column here in row 4 represents 156. The column above it that looks to me almost the same size is almost 300. So they're not proportional as you look up and down here. So it makes sense only to be comparing the data for a given row at a time. Now the data down below has negatives in it, and we can create the spark lines in the same way, but there's another way to create spark lines. You can begin by either highlighting the data or simply highlighting the location where you want the spark lines to appear, for example here. And then on the Insert tab in the ribbon, there's the spark line section, choose line, and we've already selected the location range but not the data range. Click in this white panel, highlight the data. And OK. Similar chart, looks OK, but we do have, in this case, data below 0. Strongly recommend showing the axis here. Now, if we show an axis in the previous set of spark lines, nothing would happen, but here it does. And I think it's important to show it here. If we went up here, and even if we changed it back to line, we cannot show an axis here because nothing goes below 0. So we see what's happening, but here it does. And here too, you might consider the option of going to sparkline color, changing the weight of this to make it a bit thicker, and consider how that looks. Now, I'm going to zoom in on this a little bit, but also do something with the column width. Column N, I'm going to make it narrower. That makes these look perhaps steeper, a little more erratic. Off to the right, it flattens it out a little bit. I could also, and this could be an attention getter that I don't necessarily want, if I select rows 10 through 13 and drag the row boundary of any one of these downward, say this one, maybe it's twice as tall, that's a different look. Now, it may or may not be better. Are we trying to hide something, or are we trying to accentuate it more? So the whole idea here is, if you adjust column widths and or row heights, you tell a different story. And that's worth thinking about, at least at certain points when you're displaying data. So I've got an axis line in these examples. How might this look as a column spark line? Keep these highlighted. Let's go back to the Design tab here. Off to the left, choose Column. That might bring out the fact that the data is crossed 0 a little better. Here's line, here's column. Win-loss maybe even tells it better, but it doesn't give us any sense of volume. It's just negative or positive, win or loss, that's it. And I think you can see with different kinds of data, these are appropriate. Makes a difference sometimes. I think it's always worth exploring the different looks here. My favorite here might be column, because it brings out the negatives more strongly than line does. Line might show the trend a little bit better, but even here I think you can see the trend. The data is a bit erratic here, as it is sometimes with certain kinds of data, and that's just the nature of data. But once again, look at the options here. I've made the rows taller. If I were making a presentation, what if I had done that ahead of time? People wouldn't necessarily be aware of it. Another thing I might do here is simply take this data and on the Home tab, center it this way. Maybe that de-emphasizes the idea that I've made the rows taller, but you can explore that a bit. Let's go back to a more normal setting. Click in the upper left corner, double-click a row boundary. We're back to here. If I just select column N and make this narrower, we see what's happening that way too. So you've got some room to explore. These are called spark lines. They were introduced in Excel 2010. Sometimes they're simply described as in-cell charts. Pretty fair description of this feature. Easy to get to, maybe sometimes just the easiest way. Highlight the data, and you'll see the little button here, and choose spark lines that way. Now, one other option here that you want to take a look at with a different set of data, and it's organized a little bit differently. This is more vertically oriented. If we select this data and use that quick analysis button and choose spark lines, what happens here? We're not seeing a preview in the background. It simply doesn't handle the data. But if you wanted to show the data, and I'm saying probably ahead of time this is not going to look that great, how might this data look as a spark line? I can either select the data first or the spark line location first. I've done the data here. Insert tab, spark lines line, there it is. Where do we want the spark lines? Click in this panel, click cell S11 right below this, click OK. Now, I wouldn't say that's a great choice because it's below the data, but I think it could be used in some scenarios. So keep in mind you have the ability to put this where you want. And here too, as we did with the previous versions, spark line weight, make it a little bit thicker usually, it makes it look a little bit better. Possibly put in the axis, although in this case it doesn't go negative, so that wouldn't help. Here too, maybe the column version could be better. So we've got options here in cell charts by way of what are called spark lines.